the potential impacts of the big rail merger, AI embeds in warehouses, and the people behind the tech. Pull up a chair and join us as the editors of DC Velocity discuss these stories, as well as news and supply chain trends on this week's Logistics Matters podcast. Hi, I'm Dave Maloney. I'm the Group Editorial Director at DC Velocity. Welcome. Logistics Matters is sponsored by ID Label. As you gear up for 2026, make sure your warehouse is ready to perform. From durable rack and pallet labels to cold storage solutions, floor striping, and professional installation, ID Label has you covered. Visit idlabelinc.com to get started or to request your free sample pack today. ID Label, when we do the barcodes, you can do more. As usual, our DC Velocity senior editors Ben Ames and Victoria Kickham will be along to provide their insights into the top stories of this week. But to begin today, sometime in the new year, we'll likely find out whether the huge mega merger between two historic railroads will go through. Union Pacific and Norfolk Southern aim to join forces to create a true transcontinental railroad. But it's not without controversy. What will the effects be on our nation's supply chains? To find out, here's Ben with today's guest. Ben?
Yeah, thanks, Dave. As you say, the Union Pacific and Norfolk Southern say that their plan to merge would create what they call the country's first transcontinental railroad. But also, things are complex in this nation's enormous supply chain and clusters of supply chains. So it's fair to say that industry reaction is mixed. Some business associations have already said they oppose the deal. And meanwhile, such a deal would, of course, need federal approval, and that would have to come from a White House administration that's been fairly unpredictable in its first year. So here to talk about it all is our guest this week, Marc Schaffer, who is principal economist at Breakthrough Fuel, which helps shippers improve transportation network efficiency. Welcome, Marc.
Ben, thanks for having me.
Marc, to start us off, could you just give a quick description of Breakthrough and the company's role in the supply chains?
Yeah, sure. So Breakthrough, we're essentially a transportation intelligence company. We help provide sustainable fuel and freight solutions for our shipper base of clients. And the goals really are to help them find ways to reduce costs, create efficient networks, decarbonize transportation. And through that process, we actually manage and oversee about $35 billion in transportation spend and oversee about 46 million shipments a year. And some of that is, everything from marine to truckload to what's pertinent to our conversation today, which is intermodal and rail across, our clients, which include Fortune 500 shippers.
Great, thank you. So talking about rail and intermodal, and more specifically talking about mega mergers between railroads, it was only about 2 years ago that Canadian Pacific and Kansas City Southern finalized their own merger. They're now today known as CPKC. How is this one any different?
But I think we're talking about big mergers here in general with both these cases, but I think, as you point out, there's some substantial differences, specifically when I think about the scale of this merger, the geography, and the regulation. So from a scale perspective, the previous merger that resulted in CPKC, that was a merger between two of the smallest Class 1 rails at the time, whereas the Union Pacific Norfolk Southern potential proposed merger actually is much larger in scale and might result in one of the largest Class 1s that we have that might involve overseeing something like 40% of the carload volume that we see on rail. So substantially different from the size of what we're talking about in terms of the outcome of the merger. The geography also is a little bit different as well. So with CPKC, what that was actually doing was essentially connecting a north to south corridor with Canadian Pacific coming through and actually attaching from Canada to the United States all the way through Mexico. So it was a north-south route. This is different because this is going to be an east-west connection to produce that transcontinental railroad. So NS is largely on the East Coast, which would connect in the Midwest all the way to run West Coast with Union Pacific to make that East Coast transcontinental relationship. And then lastly, which I think is a really important part of the conversation, is partially because of some of the size things that we talked about before. the regulations are going to be a little bit different, and the standard is going to be a little bit tougher to pass through for approval for the UP&S one. It's essentially a higher bar of regulation for this merger.
Really interesting. So, 40% of rail volume, I think you said. Obviously, that could make an enormous impact on markets potentially. But as you were just alluding to, perhaps that's one of the reasons that this merger faces a higher bar for approval. It has to go before a group called the Surface Transportation Board at the federal level, right?
Correct. Yeah. So this is one of those things, and we talk about, antitrust and things, and they go to, the Department of Justice and different things. But this particular one is under the purview of the Surface Transportation Board, and the higher bar it points back to actually the 2001 merger rules that were put in place by the Surface Transportation Board. And maybe the short part of this, and then I'll give you slightly more background, is before 2001, the merger standard or the guiding principle was that the merger needs to essentially preserve the competitive landscape. What changed after the merger is moving forward, if two class ones are essentially going to merge, they have to prove and make the case that they're not only going to preserve competition, but enhance the competitive landscape in some way. So they essentially have to make the case that the result of this is better for competition as opposed to just maintaining the status quo. Now, of course, you might be thinking, well, the CPKC merger just happened 2 years ago. Wasn't the same bar applied? There actually was a waiver in that case because KCS was one of the smallest ones, so they allowed it to just go under the previous rules. Whereas the UP&S one is going to be the first merger where these rules are actually fully in place, and going to see how this is impacted. And part of this is, to some extent, this is the reason why those rules were essentially put in place. There was a lot of consolidations and mergers prior to 2001. And you can think about this, right? Before you had a lot of class ones, and that number gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And in 2001, when you're looking at the landscape, you get to the point where, okay, if we only have 6, 7, 8 carriers left, and right now, we're down to 6, we get to the point where, another merger, you're getting into duopoly conversations, monopoly conversations. So the idea of sort of stating, all right, if we're going to have another merger that might entertain a conversation about duopolies, we kind of have to really think about, okay, what's the result of this? And is this in the public interest and the public good to have this come through by enhancing competition, which is why that bar is going to be a little bit higher to prove in this case as they seek approval for this.
Oh, I got it. Got it. Interesting. Because I remember the discussion of that waiver and the CPKC deal, which was disputed, of course, by some parties as well. But that
Yep.
explains very well. But let's game it out. If the Union Pacific and Kansas City Southern merger does get approved, they say that could lead to potential gains in long haul and intermodal efficiency. But there are also voices in the industry that say that those could be offset by, as you just touched on, reduced competition, and of course less shipper leverage. What are the different sides of the scale here?
I mean, yeah, I think you sort of laid out what I would argue is going to be a very difficult and challenging task for the Surface Transportation Board as they're evaluating this. So ultimately, the whole thing we have to weigh here is what are the potential benefits of this, and do they enhance competition versus those costs? And from the benefit side, I mean, probably the biggest one the supporters are going to argue and make the case for, which you alluded to, is this seamless coast to coast, east to west network. So right now, if you're doing some sort of long haul movement that runs, completely coast to coast, what you're likely doing is, working with some kind of West Coast carrier. It's going to hit somewhere in the Midwest. There's going to be an interchange that happens before you move over to the East Coast carrier to get to your final destination, or vice versa. Well, one of the challenges with that is actually you bring it in a one carrier. It's got to go through an interchange process, move to different trains, and connect through. And there's efficiency loss in that process by having to do the interchange. So in this particular instance, an argument would be if we can just move straight through and not have to do as much interchange activity, this should be able to make that part of the process much more efficient. I think you're also going to hear supporters argue, and this is probably true of any merger really, is that there's scale and cost efficiencies. If you got two large companies that have similar operations, merging them, you can reduce it down to one to be a little bit leaner would be an argument that I'm sure we're going to be hearing, and we're already hearing some of that. And then I think the other thing, which is also interesting when you talk about rail competition, is I think there's competition amongst rail carriers themselves, which is kind of the heart of this conversation. But also another massive component of competition here is competition with truckload, because shippers have options, and we can go on intermodal and use rail. If that doesn't work out, we can use truckload. So that's another part of the element that plays into this competitive landscape. And I think supporters and UP&S are going to be arguing that this makes them more competitive with truckload by actually, being a little bit more seamless in this process. On the other hand, as you alluded to, there's the potential risk or harm that could come from this, and most of this really comes down to, are shippers going to be harmed and lose negotiating power if we actually have what now is, two rail carriers merging into one large carrier that's going to have a lot of control and role in markets. When the initial concern there, of course, is going to be, are we going to have higher prices as a result of this as shippers because we have less choices? And this is where I think the Surface Transportation Board has a hard task of the complexity of these mergers. And while on one hand, the UP&S story is nice in that you're taking an East Coast network connecting it to a West Coast network, so the overlap is some pockets in the Midwest. But one of the concerns is, are there routes or lanes where right now a shipper has two choices, and those two choices might be these two merging carriers, rail carriers, and as a result of merge, do I now only have one choice? Those are situations that have to be looked at very closely because those do have some immediate impacts on competition. Although again, there's limited overlap in this case because it's geographically kind of split, but that is an important consideration. And then the other part that's really important for costs, and I think this is out of people who have been in the industry for a while and lived through some mergers before, is there's often service disruptions as there's the merging happening between technology platforms and equipment and all these things that often creates a lot of challenges if service is disrupted in this integration process. So I think there's a lot of arguments to make for this, and a lot of arguments that the opponents are going to bring up that are against this. But these are all things that the Surface Transportation Board is really going to have to take their time and weigh carefully, because I think there's some valid arguments on both sides to be considered.
Fascinating. So just to wrap things up, let's leave this on a note about the shippers, because of course that's where the freight comes from.
Yep.
What sort of questions should shippers be asking in the meantime? And is there any sort of role that they have to play in the decision?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad that you asked that question. I think the biggest thing to be thinking about for shippers right now is find ways to stay proactive, stay informed, and stay engaged. And I think that the first part of that is, if I'm a shipper right now, is sort of looking at my freight network right now. How am I moving things? Where am I moving things? And what potential overlap do I have that could be impacted by this merger? Are there areas where I might only be working with these two potential options? What are the other competing rail carriers doing right now, even in advance of this merger, to prepare if it were to go through, and even if it doesn't, to create different alliances? So first, kind of figure out what's my risk exposure to this right now based upon where I'm shipping and who I'm shipping with, as well as the modal mix attached to that. And then I think the other part of this is really going to be take an active voice. So do that evaluation and figure out if this is something that you believe would be a benefit to you, or if you think this actually could be a challenge or a risk to you, and use that voice. So part of the surface transportation approval process, once this application is filed, is there's period for open public comment. So you can voice opposition, you can voice support. And even if it's not you as an individual shipper, I think a lot of the trade associations right now that are involved in this space are kind of coming together to put out their comments and things like that. And that's an opportunity for shippers to take an active role in that conversation. And in addition to just voicing support or opposition, often with these mergers, even if it goes through, which that's, again, a long road for that even happening yet, there's often conditions applied that must be met. So even voicing some conditions that you would like to see if it were to happen is also something I think would be helpful and informative to the Surface Transportation Board. In many ways, I think of it kind of like zoning on a new highway. If the highway is going through your backyard, you're going to want to sit at the table to have a conversation in that. And I think that's really the big part of this. I mean, it's a pivotal moment for U.S. freight, really. This potential merger happening. There's real potential, but also real risks that the Surface Transportation Board is going to have to very carefully weigh what this looks like. But yeah, in short, I would say shippers should try to stay engaged, stay informed, and be as proactive as they can over this process. Which there's a long road ahead for this entire process for sure.
Got it. Yeah. As you say, this will touch a whole lot of people if it happens or doesn't. Mark, we really appreciate your coming on and walking us through this today.
Yeah, my pleasure. Happy to join you.
Our guest today on the podcast has been Marc Schaffer from Breakthrough Fuel. Back to you, Dave.
Thank you, Mark and Ben. Now let's take a look at some of the other supply chain news from the week. And new technologies are continuing to revolutionize work as we know it, and the warehouse is one place where huge impacts are being made. And Victoria, you reported this week on some new research into how this new tech is being applied.
That's right, Dave. So it seems that thanks to technology, warehouses are getting smarter every day. A study released just after Thanksgiving shows that artificial intelligence and machine learning are no longer just experimental tools, but they're becoming core drivers of productivity, accuracy, and workforce evolution in the warehouse. Now, this is according to a study from Mecalux and the MIT Intelligent Logistics Systems Lab at MIT's Center for Transportation and Logistics. The lab is a joint project between Mecalux and MIT. This was a study of more than 2,000 supply chain and warehousing professionals, and it found that 60% of warehouses have implemented some form of AI or machine learning. It also found that nearly 90%, are operating at automation levels that are beyond basic. To flesh that out a bit, a majority of respondents, about 58%, describe their organizations as operating at advanced or full automation maturity, with nearly 31% saying they operate at a moderate level of automation. Just under 12% of the respondents said their facilities utilize basic automation or are fully manual.
Victoria, those statistics you just mentioned seem pretty impressive. I assume that it's the larger operations that are the most automated and advanced in this. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. The 2,000 respondents were from companies across 21 countries, and the majority of those that report high automation maturity are with larger businesses that have complex multi-site logistics networks. But among all respondents, the survey found that AI and machine learning are being used to support a whole range of day-to-day workflows, things like order picking, inventory optimization, equipment maintenance, labor planning, and safety monitoring. The study is actually really packed with some interesting statistics, so I'll give you just a couple more. They found that AI investments are paying off more quickly than many expected. Most businesses now dedicate between 11% and 30% of their warehouse technology budgets to AI and machine learning initiatives, and the typical payback period is just 2 to 3 years. So that's probably a good reason for the proliferation of the technology across the industry. They also found that all this automation is adding value to the workforce, which is something that frequently arises when talking about robotics and automation. The concern is that it will detract from rather than add to the worker experience. But this study found that AI is contributing to higher productivity, greater job satisfaction, and expanded workforce opportunities. More than 3/4 of respondents reported a rise in employee productivity and satisfaction after implementing AI tools, and more than half reported growing the size of their workforce. Some of the new roles that are emerging are AI and ML engineers, automation specialists, process improvement experts, and data scientists. So, a wide range of new opportunities out there in the warehouse.
Yeah, it certainly seems that way. And I know that adopting new technologies has always taken a bit of an adjustment period, but I think history shows that once good applications become mainstream, productivity and efficiencies usually follow. So it's a good thing.
It is. Absolutely.
Thank you, Victoria.
You're welcome.
And Ben, keeping on the AI theme, you wrote a story pulling the curtain a bit to see what's really behind the tech.
That's right. And this actually touches on something that Victoria was just mentioning here, some of the new job titles and opportunities that may come hand in hand with more applications of AI and other technologies. It's a huge trend, obviously, but this week, the story that I saw talked less about the technology and more about the people who are behind some of these AI and other automation. So not specifically the software coders, for example, or the robot builders, but more so it was about the electricians and the manufacturing experts who actually keep all this stuff running. So this came from Siemens USA. That's the American arm of Siemens, the big German industrial technology provider. And they actually announced a plan to train 200,000 electricians and manufacturing experts by 2030. That's only 5 years away, 4 years if you're counting New Year's coming up. But Siemens said it's a response to what the company called the nation's urgent need for a skilled and adaptable workforce. So according to Siemens, that demand for skilled trades is really surging. It's driven in large part, as we said, by the growth of digital tools and AI. But they said electrician jobs are expected to grow 9% from 2024 to 2034, which is well above the national average. And likewise, manufacturing faces similar pressures in the coming decade, with nearly 500,000 openings that are reported annually.
Well, that does make a lot of sense. And we, of course, often hear about the need for more skilled labor, but 200,000 people to train. Did they say how they intend to train so many people?
It does sound awfully ambitious, doesn't it? But Siemens says it can do it through an expansion of its existing workforce development partnerships. That's where employees work alongside training partners and academic institutions in order to gain the skills needed to pursue careers. And this is important, Siemens said, both within Siemens and across industries to help strengthen the broader talent pipeline, powering U.S. industrial growth at various companies. So more specifically, Siemens will work with a nationwide network, as we said, but it includes community colleges, technical programs, trade organizations, and industry leaders. Through that, they can build training pathways, such as certifications and hands-on technical programs. So there's a Siemens executive named Judith Weiss who said, in an era of unprecedented digital transformation, the future of American industry depends on a skilled and AI-enabled workforce. And she said the company is committed to getting there by creating what she called accessible pathways for lifelong learning, helping individuals gain new skills and deepen their current expertise. So from that approach, it sounds like the workforce of the future is going to have to keep training and learning, and one of those new phrases, upskilling, pretty much continuously in order to keep up with all these launches of new technologies.
That's right. I know that teams can never really stop learning and growing, ours included. Otherwise, they'll find themselves left behind.
For sure. Yep, I think we're seeing it already.
Thank you, Ben.
Glad to.
We encourage listeners to go to dcvelocity.com for more on these and other supply chain stories. Also, check out the podcast notes section for some direct links to read more about the topics that we discussed today. And we'd like to thank Marc Schaffer of Breakthrough Fuel for being our guest. We welcome your comments on this topic and our other stories. You can email us at podcast@agilebme.com. We also encourage you to subscribe to Logistics Matters at your favorite podcast platform. Our new episodes are uploaded on Fridays. And a reminder that Logistics Matters is sponsored by ID Label. The countdown to 2026 is on. If you've got a new warehouse, WMS conversion, or reconfiguration coming up in the new year, lock in your labeling partner now. ID Label manufactures and installs durable warehouse labels and signs. Request your free sample pack today at idlabelinc.com. ID Label. When we do the barcodes, you can do more. We'll be back again next week with another edition of Logistics Matters. Be sure to join us. Until then, have a great week.